The morning wind carried dust across the Colorado Plateau as 23-year-old Rebecca Martinez stepped out of her family's adobe home in Cedar Ridge. The year was 1887, and the small settlement existed as a fragile outpost where white settlers clung to dreams of prosperity while tensions with neighboring tribes simmered just beneath the surface. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca had always been different from the other women in Cedar Ridge. While they busied themselves with quilting circles and church socials, she spent her days teaching at the small schoolhouse, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, her intelligent brown eyes focused on giving the settlement's children something more than the narrow worldview their parents offered. Her father, Thomas Martinez, owned the general store and held considerable influence in town. He'd built their family's reputation on hard work and conservative values, expecting Rebecca to marry well within their community. Her mother, Eleanor, dreamed of grandchildren and a respectable son-in-law who could help expand their business interests. But Rebecca's heart had other plans. It started with the horses. Every Tuesday, a group of Navajo traders would arrive at the settlement's edge to conduct business. Most townspeople viewed these exchanges with suspicion and barely concealed hostility, but Rebecca found herself drawn to their dignity and the quiet respect they showed for the land. Among them was Ayanna, a 26-year-old Navajo man whose name meant eternal blossom in his language. He stood tall and lean, with weathered hands that spoke of years working with horses and land. His dark eyes held a depth that seemed to see beyond the surface of things, and when he smiled, it was with genuine warmth rather than the forced politeness Rebecca had grown accustomed to from the men in her own community. Their first conversation happened by accident. Rebecca had been walking near the trading post when a sudden thunderstorm erupted across the plateau. She took shelter under the same rocky overhang where Ayanna had tied his horses, waiting for the rain to pass. "Your horses are beautiful," she said, breaking the awkward silence as lightning illuminated the landscape around them. Ayanna looked surprised that she had spoken to him at all. Most white women in the settlement avoided eye contact with the Navajo traders entirely. "They are my partners," he replied in careful English. "We understand each other." Rebecca noticed the way he spoke about the animals, not as property but as companions. It was so different from how the men in her town discussed their livestock, always in terms of value and utility. "I've always believed animals have souls," she said quietly. "My father thinks that's foolish." "Your father sees only what brings money," Ayanna observed, not unkindly. "But you see what brings meaning." The storm passed, but something had shifted. Between them, over the following weeks, Rebecca found herself timing her walks to coincide with the Navajo trading visits. She and Ayanna began exchanging brief conversations about horses, about the land, about the vast differences in how their peoples viewed the world. Ayanna told her about the Navajo belief that all living things were connected, that harmony came from understanding one's place in the greater web of existence. Rebecca shared her frustration with the limitations placed on women in her community, her desire to see beyond the narrow confines of Cedar Ridge. "In my family," Ayanna said during one of their talks, "women are respected as equals. They own property, make decisions, choose their own paths. My grandmother was a medicine woman who guided our entire clan." Rebecca had never heard of such a thing. In her world, women were expected to be dependent, deferential, content with domestic duties. The idea that there were societies where women held real power seemed almost mythical. As autumn arrived, their friendship deepened into something more dangerous. They began meeting in secret at an old shepherd's cabin halfway between the settlement and the Navajo territory. These meetings were innocent at first, Shared meals, long conversations about their dreams and fears, quiet moments watching the sunset paint the mesas in brilliant colors. But Cedar Ridge was a small community where gossip traveled faster than wildfire. Sarah Collins, the banker's wife and the town's most dedicated busybody, had noticed Rebecca's extended walks and began following her. When she witnessed Rebecca and Ayanna sitting together by the creek, behind the old cabin, sharing what appeared to be an intimate conversation, she nearly fainted from the scandal of it. Within hours, half the town knew about Rebecca's inappropriate association with the Navajo trader. By evening, her father had been informed by 3 separate sources about his daughter's shocking behavior. Thomas Martinez was a man who prized respectability above all else. His position in the community depended on maintaining certain standards, and his daughter's involvement with a Native American threatened everything he had worked to build. When he confronted Rebecca that night, his face was red with anger and humiliation. "How could you disgrace our family like this?" he demanded. "Do you have any idea what people are saying? What this does to our reputation?" Rebecca tried to explain that Ayanna was kind, intelligent, and honorable, that their friendship was based on mutual respect and shared interests. But her father couldn't hear past his own prejudices and fears. "You will end this immediately," he commanded. "You will not speak to that man again, and you will marry Henry Whitmore by spring." Henry Whitmore was the son of the town's wealthiest rancher, a bland young man with soft hands and entitled attitudes who had been pursuing Rebecca for months despite her obvious lack of interest. The thought of spending her life as his wife, bearing his children, and pretending to be content with such a limited existence filled Rebecca with despair. She tried to comply with her father's demands. For 2 weeks, she avoided the trading post and forced herself to be civil to Henry's awkward courtship attempts. But her heart felt empty without the intellectual stimulation and emotional connection she had found with Ayanna. When the Navajo traders came to town for what she thought would be the last time before winter, Rebecca couldn't help herself. She had to see Ayanna one more time, to explain why she could no longer meet with him, to say goodbye properly. They met at their usual spot by the creek, and the pain in both their eyes was unmistakable. Ayanna had noticed her absence, and correctly guessed what had happened. "Your people will never accept what we feel for each other," he said sadly. "Perhaps it is better this way." But Rebecca surprised them both by taking his hands in hers. "I don't care what they accept," she said, with sudden fierce determination. "I care about what's true, and the truth is that I love you." The words hung in the autumn air between them, changing everything. Ayanna looked into her eyes and saw the same depth of feeling reflected there that he carried in his own heart. "I love you too," he said simply. "But love may not be enough to bridge the gap between our worlds." They held each other as the sun set behind the mesas, both knowing that their love would demand sacrifices that neither fully understood yet. What they didn't know was that Sarah Collins had followed Rebecca again, and this time she had witnessed not just conversation, but an unmistakable declaration of love between a white woman and a Navajo man. By morning, the scandal would explode through Cedar Ridge like dynamite, setting in motion events that would test the strength of their love and change both their lives forever. The news of Rebecca's transgression spread through Cedar Ridge like poison in a well. By dawn, clusters of women gathered outside the general store, their voices hushed but their expressions scandalized. Men spoke in harsh whispers at the saloon, their words growing more venomous with each drink. The schoolhouse where Rebecca had taught stood empty that morning, as parents refused to send their children to learn from a woman they now considered tainted. Thomas Martinez opened his store to find customers avoiding his gaze, their usual friendly greetings replaced by cold silence. Eleanor Martinez couldn't bring herself to leave the house, overwhelmed by the shame of having neighbors whisper about her daughter's savage romance. The family's carefully constructed social standing crumbled in mere hours. When Rebecca arrived at the schoolhouse that Tuesday morning, she found the door barred and a crude sign nailed to the wood: "No Indian lovers allowed." The children she had taught to read and write now peered at her through windows, their innocent faces reflecting the hatred their parents had poisoned them with overnight. Margaret Stone, the mayor's wife, intercepted Rebecca on her walk home. Margaret's thin lips were pressed into a disapproving line, her grey hair pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch the skin of her face. "Rebecca Martinez, you have brought disgrace upon this entire community," Margaret declared loud enough for passers-by to hear. "Decent women don't consort with savages. What example does this set for our children?" Rebecca felt her cheeks burn, but she held her head high. "Ayana is more honorable than most men in this town. Judge him by his character, not his heritage." The gathered crowd gasped at her boldness. Margaret's face turned purple with indignation. "Character? These people are barely civilized. They worship heathen gods and live like animals. For a Christian woman to even speak such words. Then perhaps your Christianity lacks the compassion mine possesses," Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. The confrontation might have escalated further, but Sheriff William Tucker arrived to disperse the crowd. Tucker was a fair man who had always respected Rebecca's intelligence, but even he couldn't hide his disappointment as he escorted her home. "Miss Martinez," he said quietly as they walked, "I've known you since you were a child. You're one of the smartest people in this town, which makes this situation all the more puzzling. Surely you understand the impossible position you've put yourself in." Rebecca looked at the man who had once praised her teaching abilities and defended her right to work, despite her father's initial objections. "Sheriff Tucker, you've always believed in judging people fairly. If you met Ayana without knowing his heritage, you would find him worthy of respect. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Perhaps," Tucker admitted reluctantly, "but respect and other feelings are different. Matters entirely. Some boundaries exist for good reasons, Rebecca. The world isn't ready for what you're suggesting." At home, Rebecca faced the full fury of her father's humiliation. Thomas Martinez had spent the morning fielding awkward conversations with customers who no longer met his eyes. 3 families had already taken their business elsewhere, and Henry Whitmore's father had arrived at the store to formally withdraw. His son's marriage proposal. "You've destroyed everything," Thomas shouted, his face flushed with anger and grief. 20 years I've built this business, this reputation, this life for our family. One day, Rebecca. It took you one day to tear it all down." Eleanor Martinez sat in her rocking chair, tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to us? We gave you everything: education, freedom to teach, respect in this community, and you threw it away for what?" "For love," Rebecca answered simply. "For the chance to be with someone who sees me as an equal, who values my thoughts and dreams." Her father's laugh was bitter and harsh. "Love? You call this shameful infatuation love? You've been bewitched by a savage who probably laughs about your foolishness with his tribe." "You don't know him," Rebecca protested, but her father's rage had moved beyond reason. "I know enough," Thomas declared. "You will pack your belongings. Immediately. You are no longer welcome in this house, in this town, or in this family. If you choose them over us, then live with that choice." The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. She had expected anger, even punishment, but banishment from her own family seemed impossible to comprehend. Eleanor's sobs filled the silence. That followed, but she made no move to defend her daughter or soften her husband's decree. "Father, please," Rebecca whispered, her composure finally beginning to crack. "I'm still your daughter." "My daughter would never have brought such shame upon our name," Thomas replied coldly. "My daughter would have married Henry Whitmore and given me grandchildren I could be proud of. You are a stranger to me now." With trembling hands, Rebecca packed her few belongings into a single carpet bag. Her teaching books, some clothes, her mother's locket, the remnants of a life that had been torn apart by prejudice and fear. Eleanor remained in her chair, refusing to even look at her daughter, while Thomas stood rigid by the window, his back turned in final rejection. As Rebecca prepared to leave the only home she had ever known, her younger brother Daniel slipped into her room. At 19, Daniel had always looked up to his sister's courage and intelligence, and his face now showed a mixture of confusion and grief. "Where will you go?" he asked quietly, glancing toward the door to ensure their father wouldn't hear. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I can't stay where love is considered a crime." Daniel pressed a small pouch of coins into her hand, his savings from working at the store. "Take this, and Rebecca, I don't understand what you've done, but I know you're not evil. Maybe someday, when the anger fades." She hugged her brother tightly, knowing it might be the last time she would see him. The weight of losing her entire family pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Walking through Cedar Ridge with her belongings, Rebecca faced a gauntlet of hostile stares and whispered insults. Children who had once eagerly raised their hands in her classroom now threw small stones at her feet. Women who had previously sought her advice on various matters now crossed the street to avoid her path. Only Dr. Samuel Harrison showed her any kindness. The elderly physician had delivered Rebecca when she was born and had always appreciated her quick mind and gentle nature with his patients' children. "This is madness," he said quietly, stepping out of his office as she passed. "Whatever mistakes you may have made, banishment is medieval cruelty." "Thank you, Dr. Harrison," Rebecca replied, grateful for even this small gesture of humanity. "But perhaps it's better this way. I could never pretend to be someone I'm not, just to satisfy their prejudices." "Where will you go, child?" Rebecca looked toward the distant mesas where she knew Ayana's people lived. "I'll find my way." The doctor pressed a small medical kit into her hands. "Take this, and remember, healing comes in many forms. Sometimes we must leave one life behind to find the one we're meant to live." As the sun began to set, Rebecca reached the edge of Cedar Ridge. Behind her lay everything familiar: her family, her career, her place in society. Ahead stretched unknown territory, both literally and figuratively. She had no clear plan, no guaranteed welcome anywhere, and barely enough money to survive a week. But as she walked toward the wilderness that separated the white settlement from Navajo territory, she felt something unexpected alongside her fear and grief. For the first time in her life, she was completely free to choose her own path, regardless of others' expectations or approval. The desert evening air carried the scent of sage and the distant sound of coyotes beginning their nightly chorus. Stars emerged one by one in the vast sky above, seeming to light her way forward into uncertainty. Rebecca Martinez had lost everything she thought defined her identity. Soon she would discover what remained when all external validation was stripped away, and whether the love she had declared was strong enough to build a new life upon. Miles away, in a traditional hogan surrounded by his extended family, Ayana felt a deep unease he couldn't explain. He had not seen Rebecca for 3 days, and something in the wind seemed to whisper of change and loss. His grandmother, a respected medicine woman named Shimasani, watched him pace restlessly around the fire. "Your heart walks in 2 worlds," she observed quietly. But hearts that split between worlds often find themselves belonging fully to neither. Ayana stopped pacing and met his grandmother's wise eyes. What if the choice has already been made for us? Shimasani studied the flames dancing between them, reading patterns that spoke of challenges and transformations ahead. Then we must trust that love strong enough to bridge such differences is also strong enough to survive them. Neither Rebecca nor Ayana yet understood the full magnitude of the journey they had begun, or the tests that would determine whether their love could indeed conquer the hatred and fear that surrounded them. The hardest trials still lay ahead, but somewhere in the vast landscape between their two worlds, destiny was already preparing the ground for either triumph or tragedy. The desert stretched endlessly before Rebecca as she walked through her second day in the wilderness. Her water was running dangerously low, and the September sun beat down mercilessly on the rocky terrain. Each step forward took her farther from any possibility of return and deeper into territory she had never explored. By midday, exhaustion forced her to seek shelter beneath a towering red rock formation. Her feet were blistered inside her leather boots, and the weight of her carpet bag felt enormous. She rationed herself to small sips from her remaining water, knowing she had to make it last until she found a stream or spring. As she rested in the shade, Rebecca's mind wandered to the comfortable bed she had slept in just 2 nights ago, the reliable meals her mother had prepared, the security of a roof over her head. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had she made a terrible mistake? Was her father right that she had thrown away everything sensible for a foolish dream? But then she remembered Ayana's eyes when he spoke about his people's beliefs, the way he listened to her thoughts as if they mattered, the respect he showed for her intelligence. In Cedar Ridge, she had been valued only for her ability to conform to others' expectations. With Ayana, she had glimpsed the possibility of being valued for who she truly was. The sound of approaching horses interrupted her thoughts. 3 riders emerged from behind a cluster of boulders, their faces weathered by sun and wind. Rebecca's heart pounded as she recognized them as Navajo men, but they were not among the traders she had met in town. These men wore traditional clothing and carried themselves with the bearing of warriors. The eldest of the 3, a man with graying hair and fierce eyes, dismounted and approached her cautiously. He spoke in Navajo, his tone questioning but not hostile. Rebecca shook her head, indicating she didn't understand, and the man switched to broken English. "White woman, why are you here alone?" he asked, studying her face intently. "This land is not safe for your people." Rebecca struggled to find words that wouldn't make her situation worse. "I'm looking for someone," she said carefully. "A man named Ayana who trades horses." Recognition flickered in the elder's eyes, followed by something that might have been amusement. He exchanged rapid words with his companions, and Rebecca caught Ayana's name repeated several times. The men seemed to reach some kind of agreement. "You come," the elder said, gesturing toward his horse. "Sun kills white skin. We will take you to the water." Rebecca hesitated, knowing that accepting help from these men would make her completely dependent on their mercy. But her desperate thirst and the impossibility of surviving alone in the desert left her no choice. She nodded gratefully and allowed them to help her mount behind the elder. They rode for what felt like hours across terrain that shifted from rocky desert to rolling hills dotted with juniper trees. Finally, they descended into a hidden canyon, where a clear stream wound between towering walls of red sandstone. The sight of water made Rebecca's parched throat ache with need. The men allowed her to drink and refill her water containers before, leading her to a small camp where several traditional hogans sat clustered near the stream. Women emerged from the dwellings, their dark eyes curious as they examined this unexpected visitor. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts, some giggling at Rebecca's unusual appearance, An elderly woman with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes approached them. She wore traditional jewelry and clothing, but there was something in her bearing that commanded immediate respect. The men who had found Rebecca spoke with her in rapid Navajo, occasionally gesturing toward their guest. When the conversation ended, the woman studied Rebecca with penetrating intensity. "I am Shimasani," she said in clear English that surprised Rebecca with its fluency. "These men say you seek my grandson, Ayana." Rebecca's heart leaped at this confirmation that she had found the right place. "Yes, I do. My name is Rebecca Martinez. Ayana and I—" She paused, unsure how to explain their relationship to his grandmother. "I know who you are," Shimasani said quietly. "Ayana has spoken of the white teacher who sees beyond the color of skin, but I did not expect to find you wandering our desert like a lost spirit." Shame flooded through Rebecca as she realized how foolish her journey must appear. "My people. They discovered our friendship. I was banished from my community, from my family. I had nowhere else to go." Shimasani's expression softened slightly. "Love that costs everything is either the greatest folly or the greatest wisdom. Time will reveal which yours proves to be." The elder woman led Rebecca to a hogan where she was given food and allowed to rest. The dwelling was unlike anything Rebecca had experienced, circular, with a domed roof and an opening at the top to let out smoke from the central fire. The walls were covered with beautiful weavings, and the floor was packed earth covered with soft rugs. As evening approached, Rebecca heard the sound of returning horses. Her heart began racing as she recognized Ayana's voice among those of the returning men. Through the doorway of the hogan, she saw him dismounting from his horse, his movements quick and urgent as the men who had found her spoke with him. When Ayana appeared in the doorway of her shelter, his face showed a mixture of joy, concern, and disbelief. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the reality of her presence in his world seeming impossible to both of them. "Rebecca," he said softly, entering the hogan and kneeling beside where she sat. "What has happened? Why are you here?" She told him everything. The discovery of their relationship, the town's reaction, her family's rejection, her banishment. As she spoke, she watched anger and pain flash across his features, especially when she described her father's harsh words and her mother's silence. "I'm sorry," he said when she finished, taking her hands in his. "This is my fault. I should have known that being seen with me would bring you trouble." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "The fault lies with people who choose hatred over understanding. I regret the pain this has caused, but I don't regret loving you." Ayana's eyes searched her face, as if trying to convince himself she was real. "You gave up everything to find me, your home, your family, your entire life. I gave up a life that would have slowly killed my spirit," Rebecca replied. "But I need you to know, I'm not here expecting you to solve my problems or rescue me. I'm here because this is where I choose to be." That evening, the extended family gathered around a large fire outside the hogans. Rebecca found herself the center of curious but not unfriendly attention as Ayana introduced her to his relatives. There was his younger sister Ayana, whose name meant beautiful flower, and who possessed a quick wit that reminded Rebecca of herself at that age. His uncle Hastin was a respected medicine man who studied Rebecca with eyes that seemed to see into her soul. But it was Shimasani who posed the most challenging questions. As the fire burned low and most of the family retired to their dwellings, she invited Rebecca to walk with her along the stream. "My grandson cares for you deeply," Shimasani said as they strolled through the moonlit canyon. "But caring and belonging are different things. What do you know of our ways, our beliefs, our struggles?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I know very little," she admitted, "but I'm willing to learn. In my own community, I was valued only for my ability to fit into a narrow role. Here, I hope to discover who I might become if given the chance to grow. Growth requires more than hope, Shimasani observed. It requires sacrifice, patience, and the willingness to be transformed by what you learn. Are you prepared to become someone new? I've already begun, Rebecca replied. The woman who taught school in Cedar Ridge no longer exists. I'm discovering who remains when everything familiar is stripped away. Shimasani nodded approvingly. That is wisdom. But understand, if you choose to remain among us, you will face challenges from both worlds. Your people will never forgive you for crossing this line, and some of my people will always see you as an outsider. Are you strong enough to build a life in the space between worlds? Rebecca thought of the stones thrown at her feet, her mother's tears, her father's final rejection. I'm stronger than I knew, and I'd rather live honestly in the space between worlds than dishonestly in the heart of either one. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A small group of white men from Cedar Ridge rode into the canyon, led by Sheriff Tucker and accompanied by Henry Whitmore. Their presence created immediate tension among the Navajo, who gathered protectively around their camp. Tucker dismounted slowly, his hands visible and empty. "We've come to speak with Rebecca Martinez," he called out. "We mean no harm to anyone here." Ayana stepped forward, his body tense and ready for trouble. "Say what you came to say and leave. These people have done nothing wrong." Henry Whitmore, his face flushed with indignation and embarrassment, pointed at Rebecca as she emerged from the hogan. "This is madness, Rebecca. Living like a savage in the wilderness. Your father sent us to bring you home. There's still time to make this right." "My father banished me," Rebecca replied calmly. "I have no home to return to." He was angry. Tucker interjected. "People say things in anger they don't mean. The whole town is talking about this situation. Some folks think maybe we were too harsh, too quick to judge." Rebecca looked at the men who had ridden so far to find her, seeing in their faces a mixture of concern, curiosity, and barely concealed prejudice. "And what do you think, Sheriff Tucker?" Tucker removed his hat and ran his fingers through his gray hair. "I think you're an intelligent woman who's gotten herself into an impossible situation. I think your father loves you and wants you home, safe. And I think this arrangement, it can't end well for anyone involved." "What if I'm happy here?" Rebecca asked. "What if I've found something worth more than social approval?" Henry Whitmore stepped forward, his voice rising with frustration. "Happy, living in dirt houses with people who worship false gods? Rebecca, you were meant for better things. You could have been my wife, the mother of my children, a respected woman in our community." "Respected for being your possession," Rebecca replied, "not for being myself." The confrontation might have escalated, but Shimasani appeared beside Rebecca, her presence commanding immediate attention. She spoke directly to Sheriff Tucker in English that was not only fluent, but eloquent. "Your words speak of love and safety, but your hearts hold fear and hatred. This woman has chosen a difficult path, but it is hers to choose. We do not force anyone to remain among us, nor do we prevent anyone from leaving. The choice belongs to her alone." Tucker studied the elderly Navajo woman with growing respect. Her dignity and wisdom were impossible to dismiss or condescend to. "Ma'am, with respect, you don't understand the complications this situation creates. There are tensions between our peoples that could be made worse by misunderstandings." "I understand more than you know," Shimasani replied. "I have lived through wars and treaties, promises made and broken. I have seen hatred destroy both sides of every conflict, but I have also seen love bridge the widest canyons. Perhaps it is time to discover which force proves stronger." The white men exchanged uncertain glances. They had come expecting to retrieve. a foolish woman who had temporarily lost her senses. Instead, they found themselves confronting a complex situation that challenged their assumptions about civilization, belonging, and the nature of love itself. As the sun climbed higher in the canyon, Rebecca stood between two worlds, knowing that her next words would determine not only her own fate, but possibly the future relationship between these two communities. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her shoulders, but she also felt the strength that came from finally knowing exactly who she was and what she valued most. Rebecca looked directly at Sheriff Tucker, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to declare. "Sheriff, I appreciate that you rode all this way, but I won't be returning to Cedar Ridge. This is where I belong now." Henry Whitmore's face turned red with frustration and wounded pride. "This is insanity! You're throwing away your entire future for what? Some primitive fantasy about noble savages!" Before Rebecca could respond, Ayanna stepped forward, his eyes flashing with controlled anger. "Watch your words carefully, Whitmore. You stand in our home, surrounded by our family. Your ignorance is not welcome here." The tension crackled between the two groups like lightning before a storm. The other white men shifted nervously, hands moving closer to their weapons, while several Navajo warriors emerged from the hogans, their presence a silent but clear message. Sheriff Tucker raised his hands, trying to defuse the situation. "Now hold on, everyone. Let's keep this civil. Rebecca, your father asked me to give you this." He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. "He wanted you to read it before making any final decisions." Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the letter. Her father's familiar handwriting on the envelope brought a wave of unexpected emotion. She had been so focused on moving forward that she hadn't allowed herself to fully process the grief of losing her family. "I'll read it," she said quietly, "but it won't change my decision." She walked a short distance away, finding privacy beside the stream where she had first spoken with Shimasani. The letter was brief, written in her father's careful script. "Rebecca, your mother cries every night. Your brother asks when you're coming home. The store feels empty without your laughter. I spoke in anger, said things I cannot take back. You are still my daughter, whatever mistakes you have made. Come home. We will find a way to make this right." Your father, Thomas Martinez's tears blurred Rebecca's vision as she read the words. Despite everything, her father still loved her. Her family still wanted her back. For a moment, the pull of that familiar love and the promise of forgiveness made her heart ache with longing. But as she looked up at the red canyon walls, at the hogans where Ayanna's family had welcomed her, at Ayanna himself watching her with patient understanding, she knew that returning would mean betraying everything she had discovered about herself. She walked back to the group, folding the letter carefully. "My father says he loves me and wants me to come home, and I believe he means it. But love that demands I become someone else isn't the love I need." Henry Whitmore threw his hat on the ground in frustration. "What about your duty to your own people, your obligations to civilized society?" "What about my duty to myself?" Rebecca countered. "What about my obligation to live honestly?" Shimasani stepped forward, addressing the white men directly. "You speak of civilization as if it belongs only to you. We have lived on this land for generations beyond counting. We have laws, customs, art, medicine, stories that preserve wisdom your people have forgotten. Your civilization builds walls between hearts. Ours seeks harmony between all living things." Sheriff Tucker studied the elderly woman thoughtfully. "Ma'am, I don't dispute that your people have their own ways, but surely you understand that Rebecca wasn't raised in those ways. How can she truly belong here?" "Belonging isn't determined by where someone is born," Ayanna spoke up. "It's determined by where their spirit finds peace. Rebecca's spirit has been restless in your world since the day I met her. Here she begins to bloom like a flower, finally planted in the right soil." The poetry of his words wasn't lost on the white men, though it seemed to make them more uncomfortable rather than less. The idea that one of their own might find greater fulfillment among the Navajo challenged fundamental assumptions about superiority and civilization. Dr. Harrison, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke up. "Rebecca, I've known you since you were a child. You've always been different, more thoughtful, more questioning than others. Perhaps—" He paused, struggling with words that went against everything his society had taught him. "Perhaps you've found where you truly belong." His unexpected support surprised everyone, especially the other white men. Henry Whitmore stared at the doctor in disbelief. "Have you lost your mind too, Harrison? She's living with savages." "I'm living with people who value me for who I am, not who they want me to be," Rebecca said firmly. "People who don't see my intelligence as a threat to their authority. People who believe women can own property, make decisions, and chart their own courses." Sheriff Tucker shook his head slowly. "Rebecca, even if everything you say is true, you have to understand the larger implications. Relations between our peoples are fragile. This kind of union could make things worse for everyone." Hastian, Ayana's uncle, stepped forward. His English was more limited than Shimasani, but his words carried weight. "White man speaks of peace, but brings guns, speaks of God, but shows no love. This woman shows more honor than many who call themselves Christian." The accusation stung because it contained truth that the white men couldn't easily dismiss. They had ridden into Navajo territory armed and demanding, while their hosts had offered hospitality despite the intrusion. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that no amount of argument would change Rebecca's mind. She had found something in this canyon that she had never experienced in Cedar Ridge, acceptance for who she truly was, rather than who others expected her to be. Finally, Sheriff Tucker accepted defeat. "I'll tell your father you're safe, and that you've made your choice. I can't say he'll understand it, but at least he'll know you're alive." As the white men prepared to leave, Dr. Harrison approached Rebecca one last time. "If you ever need anything, medical supplies, word from home, anything at all, send word through the trading post. Not everyone in Cedar Ridge has forgotten your kindness." His gesture of ongoing support meant more to Rebecca than he could know. As the riders disappeared from the canyon, she felt both relief and a profound sadness. She had chosen her path, but the cost of that choice would echo through the rest of her life. That evening, the extended family gathered for a celebration that surprised Rebecca with its warmth and inclusivity. It seemed that by choosing to stay despite the pressure to leave, she had passed some kind of test in their eyes. Ayana's sister. Ayana presented Rebecca with a traditional dress made of soft deerskin and decorated with intricate beadwork. "Welcome, sister," she said in careful English, offering the gift with a shy smile. Hastian performed a blessing ceremony, asking the spirits to protect Rebecca as she began her new life among them. Though she didn't understand all the words, the sincerity and power of the ritual moved her deeply, but it was Shimasani who provided the most meaningful recognition. As the fire burned low and most of the family retired, she invited Rebecca to sit beside her beneath the star-filled sky. "You have chosen a difficult path," the elder woman said quietly. "There will be times when you question this decision, when the loneliness of being between worlds becomes almost unbearable. Your own people will never fully forgive you, and some of mine will never fully accept you." Rebecca nodded, having already considered these challenges. "I understand, but I'd rather struggle to belong somewhere I'm valued than succeed at belonging somewhere I'm diminished." Shimasani smiled approvingly. "Wisdom comes in many forms. Yours comes through courage to face truth, even when truth is uncomfortable." She paused, studying Rebecca's face in the firelight. Ayana loves you deeply, but love alone will not be enough for what lies ahead. Are you prepared to truly become one of us? To learn our ways, accept our beliefs, share our struggles? I want to learn everything, Rebecca said earnestly. Your language, your customs, your connection to this land. I want to understand what it means to live in harmony rather than conflict. Then tomorrow, your real education begins, Shimasani declared. Tonight, you are a visitor who chose to stay. Tomorrow, you begin the journey to becoming our daughter. Over the following weeks, Rebecca immersed herself in Navajo life with an intensity that surprised even herself. She learned to weave traditional patterns, each design carrying stories and meanings passed down through generations. She studied the medicinal properties of desert plants under Shimasani's patient guidance, discovering a sophisticated understanding of healing that rivaled anything. She had learned from Dr. Harrison. Most challenging of all, she began learning the Navajo language. The complex grammar and tonal nuances frustrated her quick mind, accustomed as it was to mastering new concepts easily. But Ayana's patient tutoring and the family's encouraging laughter when she made amusing mistakes created a supportive environment for learning. As autumn deepened into winter, Rebecca found herself adapting to rhythms of life she had never imagined. The Navajo relationship with time was different from the clock-driven urgency of white society. Here, activities followed natural cycles. The movement of the sun, the changing of seasons, the needs of the community. She learned to participate in the complex social networks that held the clan together. Decision-making was a communal process that valued consensus over authority. Women's voices carried equal weight in discussions about everything from resource allocation to spiritual matters. But perhaps most transformative was her growing understanding of Navajo spirituality. Unlike the stern, judgmental Christianity of her upbringing, Navajo beliefs emphasized balance, connection, and respect for all living things. The concept of Hoju, living in beauty and harmony, became a guiding principle that reshaped how she viewed her place in the world. Through it all, her relationship with Ayana deepened beyond simple romantic love into something more profound. They were partners in the truest sense, sharing daily responsibilities and supporting each other's growth. He encouraged her artistic talents, praising the innovative patterns she wove into traditional designs. She helped him with the administrative aspects of horse trading, her literacy and mathematical skills proving valuable to the family's economic activities. But their happiness existed against a backdrop of growing tension. Reports filtered in from other trading posts about increasing conflicts between white settlers and various native tribes. The federal government was implementing new policies designed to force assimilation, and there were rumors of children being taken from their families to attend distant boarding schools. One cold December morning, a messenger arrived with news that would test everything Rebecca had built in her new life. The territorial governor was organizing a commission to investigate irregular relationships between white citizens and Native Americans. Specifically, they were looking into reports of white women living among tribal communities. The implications were clear and terrifying. Rebecca's presence among the Navajo could bring unwanted government attention to the entire clan. Her choice to follow her heart might endanger the very people who had welcomed her as family. As she sat in the hogan she now shared with Ayana, listening to the wind howl through the canyon, Rebecca realized that her greatest test was still ahead. She had found her place in the world, but forces beyond her control threatened to tear it away. The question now was whether love could indeed conquer not just prejudice, but the power of governments determined to keep worlds separate. The messenger's words hung in the winter air like a death sentence. Federal investigators were already interviewing tribal agents across the territory, gathering information about white women living among native communities. Their stated purpose was to rescue these women from savage conditions and return them to civilized society. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face as the implications became clear. Her presence here didn't just threaten her own freedom, it endangered every person who had welcomed her. The government's heavy-handed approach to Indian problems was well known. Entire communities had been relocated or disbanded for lesser infractions. Hastian spoke rapidly in Navajo to the messenger, his weathered face grave with concern. Shimasani listened intently, occasionally asking sharp questions that the young man answered with obvious reluctance. When the conversation ended, an oppressive silence settled over the gathering. "They will come here within 2 weeks," Shimasani finally said in English, her voice carefully controlled. "They have names, descriptions. Someone in your former town spoke to them about you." Rebecca closed her eyes, imagining the scene. Perhaps Henry Whitmore, still stinging from rejection, had written to territorial authorities. Or maybe Sarah Collins, always eager to be the center of drama, had embellished her story for government ears. The source mattered less than the consequence. Her past had finally caught up with her present. "I have to leave," Rebecca said quietly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I won't let my choices destroy your family." Ayana's hand found hers, his grip firm and warm despite the cold. "Running will only make you look guilty. And where would you go? They're investigating the entire territory." "Then I'll go to California or Oregon. Somewhere far enough away that they can't follow. And live the rest of your life as a fugitive." Shimasani shook her head. "That is not living, child. That is merely surviving." Over the next 3 days, the family held long discussions in Navajo that Rebecca couldn't fully follow, though she caught enough words to understand they were debating her fate. Some voices spoke of hiding her in remote canyons until the investigators moved on. Others argued for confronting the authorities directly, challenging their right to interfere in tribal affairs. But it was Ayana who proposed the most audacious solution. "We will tell them the truth," he announced during a family meeting. "That Rebecca chose to be here, that she has been accepted as one of us through proper ceremonies, that she is now Navajo, not white." Hastian frowned deeply. "The white government does not recognize our ceremonies, our adoptions. To them, she will always be one of theirs, who was stolen by us. Then we must make them understand that people cannot be owned like horses or sheep," Ayana replied. "That identity comes from the heart, not from the color of skin." Rebecca admired his idealism, but she had seen enough of government bureaucracy to know how this would end. "Ayana, they won't listen to philosophical arguments. They see only what threatens their control." "Perhaps," Shimasani said thoughtfully, "there is another way, a way that uses their own laws against them." She explained her idea slowly, her words carrying the weight of decades spent observing white legal customs. If Rebecca could prove she had legally married a Navajo man according to tribal law, the federal investigators might be forced to recognize her status as a tribal member rather than a kidnapped citizen. "Marriage would protect you under both our customs and their laws," Shimasani continued. "A wife follows her husband's people. Even the white government acknowledges this principle." Rebecca felt her heart racing, not from fear, but from hope. Would such a marriage be valid? Would they have to respect it? "It would be valid among our people," Hastings confirmed. "Whether the white authorities choose to honor it depends on their willingness to acknowledge our sovereignty." Ayana turned to Rebecca, his dark eyes intense with emotion. "Is this what you want? Not as an escape from government persecution, but as the next step in our life together?" Rebecca had dreamed of this moment, but never imagined it would come under such desperate circumstances. Yet as she looked at the man who had taught her what it meant to be truly valued, she realized the timing didn't matter. Her answer would be the same, whether they were fleeing danger or celebrating in peace. "Yes," she said simply, "in whatever world we find ourselves, I want to be your wife." Preparations for the ceremony began immediately. Traditional Navajo weddings were complex affairs that could take weeks to arrange properly, but circumstances demanded they compress the process. Shimasani took charge of organizing the essential elements while sending word to scattered family members who lived too far away to attend. Rebecca learned that Navajo marriage customs were unlike anything she had experienced in white society. There was no single official who performed the ceremony, no legal documents to sign. Instead, the union was recognized through community acceptance and the completion of various rituals that bound two families together. The bride and groom each had specific responsibilities to fulfill. Ayana had to demonstrate his ability to provide for a wife by presenting gifts to Rebecca's adoptive family, the clan that had accepted her. Rebecca had to show her commitment to Navajo life by preparing traditional foods and crafts that would be shared during the celebration. Working alongside Ayana's sister and other women, Rebecca spent long hours grinding corn for ceremonial mush and weaving a wedding basket with patterns that told the story of her journey from her old life to her new one. The intricate work required skills she was still developing, but the other women patiently guided her hands and corrected her mistakes. As word of the upcoming wedding spread through the extended clan network, people began arriving from distant hogans and settlements. Each family brought gifts, blankets, jewelry, horses, sheep that would help the new couple establish their household. Rebecca was overwhelmed by the generosity of people who barely knew her, but accepted her as family. But the most meaningful gift came from an unexpected source. Dr. Harrison arrived 3 days before the ceremony, having ridden hard across dangerous winter terrain to reach the canyon. He brought medical supplies and a letter from Daniel, Rebecca's brother, along with something even more precious, news that not everyone in Cedar Ridge supported the government investigation. "Your brother wanted you to know that he's proud of your courage," Dr. Harrison said as they sat beside the fire in Shimasani's hogan. "He doesn't fully understand your choices, but he respects your right to make them." The doctor's presence at her wedding meant more to Rebecca than he could know. Here was a bridge between her two worlds, proof that love and understanding could sometimes transcend cultural boundaries. On the morning of the ceremony, Rebecca woke before dawn in the women's hogan where she had spent her final night as an unmarried woman. Ayana's sister helped her dress in the traditional wedding attire the family had prepared, a beautiful velveteen blouse decorated with silver buttons, a full skirt woven in rich earth tones, and jewelry that had been passed down through generations of Navajo women. As the sun rose over the canyon walls, painting the rocks in shades of gold and crimson, family members gathered in a circle around the ceremonial fire. Hustine, serving as the spiritual leader, began the rituals that would bind Rebecca and Ayana together, not just as individuals, but as representatives of their respective clans. The ceremony itself was unlike the solemn church weddings Rebecca had attended in Cedar Ridge. There was joy, laughter, singing, and a sense of celebration that felt completely natural. When Hustine invited the couple to share the wedding mush from a single basket, symbolizing their commitment to support each other through all of life's challenges, Rebecca felt a profound sense of belonging that went beyond romantic love. But the most powerful moment came when Shimasani stepped forward to offer the final blessing. Speaking in both Navajo and English so that all present could understand, she formally welcomed Rebecca into the clan as a daughter and recognized her marriage to Ayana as sacred and binding. "You came to us as a stranger seeking refuge," Shimasani said, her weathered hands resting on Rebecca's shoulders. "You leave this ceremony as our daughter, bound to us by choice and love rather than blood. May you walk in beauty all the days of your life." As the formal ceremonies concluded and the celebration began, Rebecca felt a deep peace settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead with the government investigators, she now had the strongest possible foundation to face them. She was no longer a white woman living among the Navajo. She was a Navajo woman who had chosen her people and her place in the world. The dancing and feasting continued long into the night, with stories and songs that celebrated not just the union of two individuals, but the possibility of harmony between different worlds. Dr. Harrison, initially uncomfortable with the unfamiliar customs, found himself drawn into the celebration as family members insisted he participate in the dancing and gift-giving. As the stars wheeled overhead in the clear desert sky, Rebecca and Ayanna finally retired to the new hogan that had been built for them during the past week. Furnished with wedding gifts and blessed by the entire community, it represented more than just a home. It was a symbol of the new life they would build together. But even as they held each other in the warmth of their marriage bed, both knew that their happiness existed in a fragile bubble that could be shattered by forces beyond their control. The federal investigators were still coming, and no amount of legal documentation or community support could guarantee they would recognize the validity of a Navajo marriage. The next morning brought a sobering reminder of the challenges ahead. A scout arrived with news that the government party had reached the territorial capital and was already conducting interviews with Indian agents and territorial officials. They were gathering testimony about irregular relationships and making it clear that they had broad authority to rescue white citizens from savage influences. Rebecca sat beside her husband in their new home, watching the morning light filter through the smoke hole in the ceiling. In 3 days, they would face the greatest test of their love and their commitment to the life they had chosen. The outcome would determine not just their own fate, but possibly the future of relationships between their two worlds. As Ayanna took her hand in his, Rebecca drew strength from the calluses on his palms, the result of years spent working with horses and land. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as husband and wife, as members of a community that had chosen love over fear. The investigators might have the power of government behind them, but Rebecca and Ayanna had something potentially more powerful: the truth of what they meant to each other, and the unshakable foundation of a marriage blessed by both law and love. The federal investigators arrived on a bitter February morning, when frost still glittered on the canyon walls. Rebecca watched from inside her hogan as 5 mounted men descended into the valley, their dark coats stark against the red rock formations. Leading them was Agent Marcus Thornfield, a thin man with pale eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority. Accompanying Thornfield were 2 territorial marshals, a military captain from the nearest fort, and a man Rebecca recognized with a shock of dismay: Reverend Jonathan Blackwood from Cedar Ridge, the minister who had baptized her as a child and who now served as the investigator's expert on her previous moral character. The Navajo community had prepared for this moment with characteristic thoroughness. Hastian stood ready to serve as spokesman, while Shimasani waited nearby with the ceremonial marriage basket and other evidence of Rebecca's legal status within the tribe. Other family members positioned themselves strategically around the canyon, creating a protective presence that was subtle but unmistakable. Agent Thornfield dismounted with military precision, his sharp gaze taking in every detail of the settlement. When he spoke, his voice carried the flat authority of federal bureaucracy. "I am Agent Marcus Thornfield of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We are here to investigate reports of a white woman being held against her will in this community. We demand to speak with one Rebecca Martinez immediately." Hastings stepped forward, his dignified bearing unimpressed by the show of official authority. "I am Hastin Begay, headman of this clan. The woman you seek is here by her own choice. She is now married according to our laws and is a member of our people." Thornfield's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Indian ceremonies have no legal standing in territorial law. Miss Martinez remains a United States citizen regardless of any savage rituals she may have participated in." Before Hastian could respond, Rebecca emerged from her hogan. She wore traditional Navajo dress with jewelry that marked her married status, and her hair was styled in the manner of Navajo women. The transformation was so complete that Reverend Blackwood actually stepped backward in shock. "Rebecca?" The minister whispered, his voice filled with horror. "My dear child, what have they done to you?" "They have given me a home, Reverend Blackwood," Rebecca replied calmly. "They have treated me with more respect and kindness than I ever received in Cedar Ridge." Agent Thornfield studied her with the clinical detachment of a man accustomed to cataloging human problems. "Miss Martinez, I am here under direct orders from the territorial governor to ensure your safe return to civilized society. Reports indicate you may be suffering from influences that have impaired your judgment." "My judgment has never been clearer," Rebecca said firmly. "I am here by choice. I am married to a good man, accepted by a loving family, and living according to principles that honor my true nature." The military captain, a weathered man named Roberts, stepped forward with what might have been genuine concern. "Ma'am, we understand these people may have treated you kindly, but you have to understand the larger implications. Relations between our peoples are complicated. Your presence here creates difficulties for everyone involved." Ayana appeared beside Rebecca, his presence immediately drawing hostile attention from the investigators. Thornfield's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, a gesture not lost on the Navajo men who had positioned themselves around the canyon. "This is my husband Ayana," Rebecca said, taking his arm with deliberate formality. "We were married according to Navajo law 3 days ago. I am now a member of his clan and subject to tribal jurisdiction." Reverend Blackwood's face turned red with indignation. "Marriage? This is not marriage. This is an abomination before God. Rebecca, you were raised in the Christian faith. How can you turn your back on everything you were taught?" "I was taught that God is love," Rebecca replied quietly. "I have found more godly love in this canyon than I ever experienced in your church, Reverend. Here I am valued for who I am, not judged for who I refuse to become." Agent Thornfield had heard enough philosophy for his taste. "Miss Martinez, regardless of your personal feelings, federal law is clear. You are a United States citizen, and no Indian ceremony can change that fact. You will return with us for proper medical and psychological evaluation." "On whose authority?" Hastin demanded, his English becoming more formal as his anger grew. "This is sovereign tribal land. You have no jurisdiction here without our consent." "I have the authority of the United States government," Thornfield replied coldly. "Tribal sovereignty exists only at the pleasure of federal authorities. Don't make this more difficult than necessary." The confrontation might have escalated into violence, but Shimasani stepped forward with the ceremonial marriage basket and several official-looking documents. Her dignified presence commanded attention even from the hostile investigators. "Before you exercise your claimed authority," she said in perfect English, "perhaps you should examine the legal evidence of this. Woman's status." She handed the papers to Agent Thornfield, who studied them with growing frustration. The documents included not only records of the Navajo marriage ceremony, but also a formal adoption decree recognizing Rebecca as a clan member, witnessed by Dr. Harrison and several other white citizens who had attended the wedding. "These are meaningless," Thornfield declared, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Indian ceremonies have no standing in federal court." "Perhaps not," Dr. Harrison said, emerging from behind one of the hogans where he had been waiting. But territorial law is more complex than you suggest, Agent Thornfield. The doctor's unexpected presence clearly surprised the investigators. Reverend Blackwood stared at him in shock. "Samuel, what are you doing here?" "I attended the wedding of two young people who love each other," Dr. Harrison replied calmly. "A ceremony that was both legally valid and morally sound according to the customs of Mrs. Rebecca's chosen people." Agent Thornfield's patience was wearing thin. "Doctor, your presence here is noted and will be reported. Now step aside. Miss Martinez is coming with us, whether she consents or not." But as the investigators moved toward Rebecca, they found their path blocked by Navajo men who had materialized from seemingly nowhere. These were not warriors painted for battle, but ordinary family members who simply refused to let harm come to one of their own. Captain Roberts, who had dealt with Indian conflicts before, recognized the dangerous shift in dynamics. "Agent Thornfield, perhaps we should consider the legal complexities," Dr. Harrison mentioned. "Forcing the issue could create complications." "The only complication is illegal interference with federal authority," Thornfield snapped. But even he could see that attempting to physically remove Rebecca would likely result in bloodshed that would be difficult to explain to his superiors. Reverend Blackwood tried a different approach, appealing directly to Rebecca's emotions. "Child, think of your poor mother. She weeps every day for her lost daughter. Your father may have spoken harshly, but he loves you. Come home where you belong." For a moment, Rebecca's resolve wavered as she thought of her mother's tears and her brother's worried letters. The pull of family love was real and powerful, even when that love came wrapped in conditions and expectations. But then she felt Ayana's steady presence beside her, saw the faces of the people who had accepted her without demanding she change her essential nature, and remembered the peace she had found in living authentically. "Reverend," she said gently, "I am home. These people are my family now. I pray that someday my birth family will understand that love cannot be contained by the boundaries others try to impose upon it." Thornfield realized that his mission was failing. Rebecca was clearly not being held against her will, and forcing her removal would create political problems that could damage his career. But admitting defeat would be equally damaging to his reputation. "Very well," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You have made your choice clear, Miss Martinez, but understand the consequences. You are choosing to live outside the protection of United States law. If troubles arise between our peoples, don't expect federal assistance." "I expect only what I have found here," Rebecca replied. "Justice, respect, and the freedom to live, according to my conscience." As the investigators prepared to leave, Reverend Blackwood made one final appeal. "Rebecca, the door to redemption remains open. When this madness passes and you realize what you've done, remember that God's forgiveness is infinite." "Thank you, Reverend," Rebecca said with genuine warmth. "But I need no forgiveness for choosing love over hatred, acceptance over prejudice. If God disapproves of such choices, then perhaps it is God who needs forgiveness." The investigators rode out of the canyon as abruptly as they had arrived, their mission a failure that would be difficult to explain to territorial authorities. But their departure left behind an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. Everyone knew this confrontation had resolved nothing permanently. That evening, as the family gathered around the fire to discuss what had transpired, Shimasani spoke words that proved prophetic. "They will not forget this defeat. Federal authorities do not accept defiance gracefully. We must be prepared for consequences we cannot yet imagine." Huston nodded grimly. "They will find other ways to punish us for protecting one of our own. New laws, new restrictions, new reasons to interfere in our affairs." But Ayana looked at his wife with eyes full of pride and determination. "Let them come, with whatever. weapons they choose. We have something stronger than their laws or their guns." "What is that?" Rebecca asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. "Truth," Ayana replied simply. "The truth that love recognizes no boundaries, that family extends beyond blood, that home is where the heart finds peace. They can make laws against the truth, but they cannot destroy it." As Rebecca sat beside her husband under the vast star-filled sky, she felt a deep certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had made the right choice. She had found her place in the world, her people, her purpose. The investigators could return with armies if they chose, but they could never take away what she had discovered about herself and about the power of love to transform both individuals and communities. The confrontation was over, but Rebecca knew her real journey was just beginning. She was no longer a white woman who had fallen in love with a Navajo man. She was a Navajo woman who had chosen her identity through courage, commitment, and the willingness to sacrifice everything familiar for something true. The federal authorities had expected to find a victim to rescue. Instead, they had encountered a woman who had rescued herself by having the courage to live authentically, regardless of the cost. That courage, more than any law or ceremony, had transformed her from an outsider seeking acceptance into a member of a community bound together by values deeper than blood or tradition. As the canyon settled into peaceful silence around them, Rebecca and Ayana looked toward a future that would bring new challenges, but also new possibilities. Their love had survived its first great test, proving strong enough to withstand not just personal prejudice, but official government opposition. Whatever came next, they would face it together as equal partners in a marriage that had been blessed by both human love and divine grace. 5 years had passed since the federal investigators retreated from the canyon, and the changes in Rebecca's life were profound beyond anything she could have imagined. The young woman who had once taught children in a one-room schoolhouse had become Shimasani Rebecca, a respected medicine woman whose knowledge bridged 2 worlds of healing. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Under her grandmother-in-law's patient guidance, Rebecca had spent countless hours learning the medicinal properties of desert plants, the proper ceremonies for gathering healing herbs, and the spiritual aspects of traditional Navajo medicine. Her previous education proved valuable as she documented remedies and translated medical knowledge between cultures. Dr. Harrison, who had become a regular visitor to the canyon, marveled at her expertise. "You've created something entirely new," he told her during one of his monthly visits. "A synthesis of traditional healing and modern medicine that benefits everyone." Rebecca's reputation had spread far beyond her immediate clan. People traveled from distant settlements seeking her help with ailments that neither white doctors nor traditional healers alone could cure. She had successfully treated a tuberculosis outbreak by combining Navajo respiratory remedies with medical techniques Dr. Harrison had taught her, but her most important role was as a cultural bridge. As tensions between white settlers and native communities continued to escalate across the territory, Rebecca found herself uniquely positioned to facilitate understanding between the 2 worlds. The federal government's approach to Indian problems had grown increasingly harsh since Agent Thornfield's failed mission. New laws restricted tribal movement, and there were persistent rumors about forced relocations. Yet Rebecca's canyon remained largely untouched, partly due to its remote location, but also because her presence there complicated the usual narratives about savage Indians and vulnerable white citizens. Ayana had become one of the most successful horse traders in the region, his reputation for honesty and fair dealing extending throughout the Southwest. The 100 horses he now owned were testament not just to his skill, but to the prosperity that had come to the entire clan through careful management and Rebecca's financial acumen. Their personal happiness had grown deeper with each passing season. Rebecca had given birth to twin children, a daughter they named Adzan, meaning woman in Navajo, and a son called Hastian, man. The children, now 3 years old, moved seamlessly between languages and cultures, equally comfortable with their grandmother's stories and their mother's literacy lessons. Watching her children play in the canyon where she had first found refuge, Rebecca often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of losing her birth family had never completely healed, but it had been overshadowed by the joy of the family she had chosen and built. That joy was tested one autumn morning when a familiar figure appeared at the canyon entrance. Daniel Martinez, now 24 and bearing the weathered look of someone who had endured hard years, rode slowly down the familiar path toward the Hogans. Rebecca's heart pounded as she recognized her brother. She hadn't seen him since the day she left Cedar Ridge, though Dr. Harrison occasionally brought news of her family. Their father had died 2 years earlier, his heart failing after a series of financial setbacks that had cost him the store. Their mother had moved to live with relatives in Santa Fe, her health broken by grief and loss. Daniel dismounted near Rebecca's hogan, his eyes taking in the scene with wonder and confusion. His sister emerged to greet him, and for a moment neither spoke. The woman before him was clearly Rebecca, but transformed in ways that went far beyond clothing and appearance. There was a serenity and confidence about her that he had never seen during their childhood. "Rebecca," he said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion, "you look happy." "I am happy," she replied simply, studying the brother she remembered as a cheerful teenager. Life had clearly been hard on him. "Daniel, what brings you here after all these years?" He glanced around the busy canyon, noting the prosperous hogans, the healthy children, the abundant livestock. "I came to see for myself what you had chosen, and to ask your forgiveness." Rebecca felt tears welling in her eyes. "Forgiveness for what?" "For not defending you when Father banished you, for letting fear and prejudice cloud my judgment, for believing the lies people told about this place and these people." Daniel's voice broke slightly. "I was young and cowardly, and I failed you when you needed family most." Ayana appeared beside Rebecca, the twins peeking shyly from behind his legs. Daniel stared at the family group, seeing not the savage corruption he had been taught to expect, but a picture of genuine love and contentment. "Daniel," Rebecca said gently, "you were 19 years old and caught between your love for me and your loyalty to our parents. I never blamed you for that impossible position." Shimasani approached, her keen eyes studying this visitor who bore such a strong resemblance to her adopted daughter. "You are the brother," she said in English, her tone neither welcoming nor hostile, but simply observant. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied, removing his hat respectfully. "I've come to see my sister and to learn about the life she's built here." Over the following days, Daniel immersed himself in the daily rhythms of canyon life. He watched Rebecca tend to sick children with a combination of traditional remedies and modern techniques. He observed Ayana working with horses, noting the patience and skill that had built their substantial herd. He played with his nephew and niece, marveling at their intelligence and bilingual abilities. Most importantly, he listened to the stories of how Rebecca had arrived as a refugee and gradually earned her place as a valued community member. He heard about her wedding, her training as a healer, her role as a bridge between cultures. "She saved my grandmother's life," one elderly man told Daniel through an interpreter. "White doctors said nothing could be done, but Rebecca found a way to heal the sickness in her chest. She teaches our children to read and write in English," a mother explained, "but she also learns our stories and keeps our traditions alive. She belongs to both worlds and helps us navigate the changing times." On his final evening in the canyon, Daniel sat with Rebecca beside the stream where she had first spoken with Shimasani years earlier. The autumn air was crisp, and stars reflected in the slow-moving water. "I understand now," he said quietly. "What you found here, what you built, it's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious about how her former world viewed her choices. Daniel looked uncomfortable. "I suppose I expected to find you broken down, maybe living in poverty, regretting your decision. The stories people tell in town, they make this place sound like hell." "And what do you see instead?" "I see a woman who found her true calling. I see a family that loves each other deeply. I see a community that values wisdom over wealth, cooperation over competition." He paused, struggling with words that challenged everything he had been taught. "I see a better way of living than what I've known." Rebecca reached over and took her brother's hand. "You could stay, you know. There's always room for one more person willing to contribute to the community." Daniel was quiet for a long time, considering possibilities he had never imagined. "I'm tempted," he finally said. "But I have responsibilities back in town. Debts to pay, commitments to honor. Maybe someday, when I've settled my affairs." "The invitation remains open," Rebecca assured him. "Family is family, regardless of blood or choice." When Daniel prepared to leave the next morning, the entire canyon turned out to see him off. Children pressed small gifts into his hands, carved animals, woven bracelets, painted stones. Adults offered blessings for safe travel and open invitations to return. As he mounted his horse, Daniel looked at his sister one last time. She stood with Ayana's arm around her shoulders, their children at her feet, surrounded by the family. "She had chosen and built. I'll tell people what I've seen here," he promised. "Maybe it won't change many minds, but at least some will know the truth." "Truth has a way of spreading," Shimasani observed, appearing beside them with her characteristic insight. "Like seeds on the wind, it finds fertile ground where it can grow." After Daniel's departure, life in the canyon settled back into its comfortable rhythms. But word of his visit spread through the region's gossip networks, and some of the stories that emerged were surprisingly positive. The narrative of Rebecca as a victim, or a rebel, began to shift towards something more complex and respectful. Dr. Harrison brought news that territorial attitudes toward irregular relationships were slowly evolving. New politicians spoke of cooperation rather than conflict with tribal communities. While prejudice and misunderstanding remained common, voices of tolerance were growing stronger. "You've become a symbol," Dr. Harrison told Rebecca during one of their conversations. "Proof that people can bridge cultural divides through love and mutual respect." "I never wanted to be a symbol," Rebecca replied. "I just wanted to live authentically." "Sometimes those are the same thing," the doctor observed. "The most powerful symbols are often people who simply insist on being themselves despite external pressure to conform." As winter settled over the canyon, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her from the schoolhouse in Cedar Ridge to her position as a respected healer and cultural bridge. She had lost one family but gained another. She had surrendered one identity but discovered a truer one. Standing in the doorway of her hogan, watching her children play in the snow while Ayana worked with his horses, Rebecca felt a deep contentment that had nothing to do with external validation or social approval. She had found her place in the world through the simple but revolutionary act of choosing love over fear, acceptance over prejudice, authenticity over conformity. The federal investigators had never returned, though rumors suggested they remained. Frustrated by their failure to rescue her, Reverend Blackwood still prayed publicly for her soul, according to letters from Daniel. But even he seemed to acknowledge that her life among the Navajo showed evidence of divine blessing rather than damnation. As for Rebecca herself, she had stopped worrying about others' opinions of her choices. She had learned that true happiness came not from meeting external expectations, but from living in harmony with one's deepest values and truest nature. The 100 horses Ayana now owned were more than symbols of prosperity. They represented the abundance that flowed naturally when people lived according to principles of mutual respect and cooperation. The love that had begun as a forbidden attraction between two people from different worlds had grown into something that enriched entire communities. On quiet evenings, when the canyon was filled with the sounds of children's laughter and family conversations, Rebecca sometimes thought about the woman she had been before she met Ayana. That Rebecca had been intelligent and capable, but constrained by others' expectations and limited by fear of social disapproval. This Rebecca, Shimasani Rebecca, wife of Ayana, mother of twins, healer of the people, had discovered freedoms she hadn't even known existed. The freedom to love without boundaries, to learn without limits, to grow without predetermined destinations. As the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns, Rebecca offered a prayer of gratitude to whatever forces had guided her toward this life. She had been banished for love, but that banishment had led to a homecoming more profound than any she could have imagined. The story that had begun with scandal and separation had become a testament to the transformative power of love that recognizes no boundaries, acknowledges no limitations, and creates new possibilities for human connection across any divide. In the end, Rebecca had not just found love, she had found herself, her people, and her purpose. The 100 horses were beautiful, but they were merely symbols of something far more valuable, a life lived with complete authenticity, surrounded by family chosen with the heart rather than assigned by birth, in service to principles that honored the full complexity and potential of human love. 10 years had transformed the American Southwest in ways that few could have predicted when Rebecca first arrived in the canyon. The territory was moving towards statehood, bringing new laws, new opportunities, and new challenges for everyone living in the region. But perhaps nowhere were these changes more evident than in the thriving community that had grown around Rebecca and Ayana's expanding influence. What had once been a single clan settlement had evolved into a trading hub that attracted visitors from across the Southwest. The 100 horses that had symbolized Ayana's prosperity had multiplied into herds that numbered in the thousands, managed across several canyons by an extended network of family and allies. But the horses were only part of a larger transformation that had turned their remote canyon into an unlikely center of cultural and economic exchange. Rebecca, now 33, had become far more than a medicine woman. Her reputation as a healer had led to requests for her services from white settlements, Mexican ranchers, and native communities across a vast region. More importantly, her ability to navigate between cultures had made her an unofficial diplomat in an area where tensions between different groups often erupted into violence. The trading post she and Ayana had established at the canyon entrance served multiple functions. It was a place where Navajo crafts found markets among white collectors, where white merchants could safely conduct business with tribal communities, and where people from different backgrounds could meet on neutral ground. The post employed over 50 people from various ethnic backgrounds, creating a model of cooperation that challenged prevailing assumptions about racial separation. Their children, now 13, had become symbols of possibility in their own right. Adzan and Hastin moved effortlessly between the Anglo schools in nearby towns and traditional Navajo education with their grandmother Shimasani. They spoke 4 languages fluently, Navajo, English, Spanish, and some Apache, and served as interpreters for visitors who struggled to communicate across cultural divides. But success had brought scrutiny that went far beyond the earlier visit from federal investigators. The trading post's prosperity had attracted attention from territorial politicians who saw opportunity in the region's growing importance. Some viewed Rebecca's community as a positive example of successful integration. Others saw it as a dangerous precedent that undermined efforts to maintain strict racial hierarchies. The political landscape was shifting rapidly as statehood approached. Progressive voices argued for policies that would protect and encourage cross-cultural cooperation. Conservative factions pushed for laws that would formally segregate racial groups and prevent contamination of white society by inferior influences. Rebecca found herself at the center of these debates, despite her preference for focusing on practical matters rather than political symbolism. Newspaper reporters made pilgrimages to the canyon, writing stories that portrayed her variously as a saint, a symbol of American possibility, or a cautionary tale about the dangers of racial mixing. The most significant challenge came when the territorial legislature proposed the Racial Purity Act, a sweeping law that would invalidate all marriages between whites and non-whites, remove mixed-race children from their families, and establish separate territories for different racial groups. The law specifically mentioned the Martinez case as an example of the problems such legislation was designed to solve. News of the proposed law reached the canyon through Dr. Harrison, who arrived one spring morning with a stack of newspapers and a deeply troubled expression. He had been following the legislative debates and understood the implications better than most. "They're using your story as justification for tearing apart families across the territory," he told Rebecca, as they sat in her expanded clinic, which now included both traditional healing spaces and modern medical equipment. "Your success has become an argument for preventing others from making similar choices." Rebecca studied the newspaper articles with growing dismay. Legislators quoted her case as evidence that white women needed protection from savage influences that could lead them to abandon their racial obligations. Her children were described as examples of the confusion that resulted from racial mixing. "They're deliberately misrepresenting everything we've built here," she said angrily. "This community works precisely because it values people for their contributions rather than their ancestry." Ayana, who had been listening from the clinic's entrance, joined the conversation with characteristic directness. "We cannot control how others use our story, but we can control how we respond to their attempts to destroy what we have created." Over the following weeks, delegations arrived at the canyon from across the Southwest. Tribal leaders sought Rebecca and Ayana's support for opposing the racial legislation. Progressive white politicians asked them to testify before territorial committees. Mexican ranchers, whose own marriages often crossed ethnic boundaries, requested help in organizing resistance to laws that would invalidate their families. But the most unexpected visitor was Maria Elena Vasquez, a prominent lawyer from Santa Fe who had built her career defending the rights of Hispanic and Native American families. She arrived with a proposal that would thrust Rebecca into the public spotlight in ways she had never imagined. "Mrs. Rebecca," Maria Elena said, using the formal address that acknowledged both Rebecca's Anglo heritage and her tribal status, "your case has become a legal precedent, whether you intended it or not. Courts across the territory reference your marriage when deciding similar cases. We need you to testify publicly about the legitimacy and success of cross-cultural families." Rebecca felt the weight of unwanted responsibility settling on her shoulders. "I never sought to be a test case for other people's rights. I simply wanted to live my own life according to my own values." "Sometimes history chooses us rather than the reverse," Maria Elena replied gently. Your private choices have become public symbols. The question is whether you'll help shape how those symbols are interpreted. The decision to engage publicly with the racial legislation debate was not made lightly. Rebecca and Ayana spent long hours discussing the implications with Shimasani, whose wisdom had guided them through every previous challenge. The elderly woman, now in her 80s, but still sharp as obsidian, offered perspective that only decades of experience could provide. "When I was young," Shimasani said one evening as they sat around the fire, "our people believed we could avoid the white world by staying apart from it. But the white world came to us anyway, bringing laws and soldiers, and ideas that changed everything, whether we participated or not. Sometimes engagement is the only path to survival." Hastian, Rebecca's adoptive father-in-law, nodded in agreement. "Our prosperity has made us visible. Visibility brings both opportunities and dangers. We must choose which dangers we prefer to face, those that come from silence or those that come from speaking truth." The decision was made easier by events that occurred while they were still debating. 3 families in nearby communities, one Anglo-Mexican, one Anglo-Apache, and one Mexican Navajo, were forcibly separated by local authorities acting in anticipation of the racial legislation. Children were removed from their homes and placed with appropriate families, while parents were prosecuted for contributing to racial delinquency. When news of these separations reached the canyon, Rebecca felt a fury that surprised her with its intensity. These were not abstract political issues, but real families being destroyed by the same prejudices that had once threatened her own happiness. "We have to act," she told Ayana that night, as they watched their own children sleep peacefully in the hogan they had built for the family. "If we remain silent while other families are torn apart, what does our success mean?" Ayana took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become habit over their years together. "Then we speak, but we speak our truth, not the truth others want to hear." The decision to testify publicly required extensive preparation. Maria Elena worked with Rebecca to understand the legal complexities of the cases that would be affected. By her testimony, Dr. Harrison provided medical evidence about the health and development of mixed heritage children in the community. Tribal leaders offered historical context about the long tradition of intermarriage between different native groups. But the most powerful preparation came from the community itself. Families throughout the region who had been touched by Rebecca's example. Some who had received medical care, others who had found economic opportunities through the trading post. Still others who had simply drawn inspiration from seeing successful cross-cultural cooperation, offered to share their stories. What emerged was a comprehensive picture of how one couple's love had created ripple effects that strengthened entire communities. The 100 horses had become thousands, but more importantly, the economic prosperity had been shared across ethnic boundaries. The medical clinic had saved lives regardless of patients' ancestry. The trading post had created opportunities for people who had previously been excluded from regional commerce. The territorial hearings took place in Santa Fe during the hottest week of July. The courthouse was packed with spectators representing every faction in the debate. Newspaper reporters from as far away as Denver and Los Angeles had come to cover what many viewed as a defining moment for the future of racial relations in the American West. Rebecca entered the courthouse wearing a dress that symbolically bridged her two worlds, Anglo in style but made from Navajo woven fabric and decorated with traditional jewelry. Ayana accompanied her, along with their children and several members of their extended family. The visual impact of this prosperous, dignified family was not lost on observers who had expected to see evidence of degradation or conflict. The prosecution's case relied heavily on racial theories that portrayed intermarriage as inherently harmful to both individuals and society. Expert witnesses testified about alleged biological incompatibilities between races and claimed that mixed heritage children suffered from psychological confusion that made them unfit for either racial community. Rebecca listened to these arguments with growing incredulity. The scientific theories being presented as fact bore no resemblance to the reality she lived every day. Her children were among the most emotionally stable and intellectually capable young people she knew, equally comfortable in Anglo schools and traditional Navajo ceremonies. When her time came to testify, Rebecca spoke with the quiet authority that came from years of healing both bodies and relationships. She described not the romantic fantasy that critics claimed motivated her choices, but the practical reality of building a life based on mutual respect and shared values. "I was not seduced by exotic romance," she told the packed courtroom. "I was attracted to principles that honored my full humanity. In my husband's culture, I found opportunities to develop abilities that my birth culture discouraged. I found family structures that valued cooperation over competition, wisdom over wealth, character over appearance." She presented evidence of the community's success, medical records showing improved health outcomes, economic data demonstrating increased prosperity, educational statistics revealing that mixed heritage children consistently outperformed their peers in both Anglo and traditional Native assessments. But her most powerful testimony came when she spoke about her children. "My son and daughter are not confused about their identity. They are enriched by having access to multiple cultural traditions. They speak languages, understand perspectives, and navigate relationships that prepare them for a world that is becoming increasingly interconnected." The cross-examination was brutal, with opposing lawyers attempting to portray Rebecca as a deluded woman who had abandoned her racial obligations and endangered her children's future. They questioned her mental stability, her moral character, and her fitness as a mother. Rebecca answered each attack with calm dignity, supported by documentation that refuted every claim. Medical examinations showed her children to be in perfect health. Educational assessments demonstrated their exceptional academic performance. Character witnesses from across the Southwest testified to the family's positive impact on their communities. The hearings lasted for 3 weeks, during which Rebecca became a national figure whose story was followed by newspapers across the country. Some portrayed her as a dangerous radical who threatened social order. Others celebrated her as a pioneer who pointed toward a more inclusive American future. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Adzan and Hastien, now 13, requested permission to address the court. Speaking in perfect English, but drawing on rhetorical traditions learned from their Navajo grandmother, they presented arguments that surprised everyone with their sophistication and power. "You debate whether we should exist," Adzan said, her young voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "But we do exist. We are proof that love creates beauty, that different traditions can strengthen rather than weaken each other, that the future belongs to those who build bridges rather than walls." Hastin followed his sister with words that would be quoted in newspapers for decades afterward. "You fear that we represent the end of something pure. We believe we represent the beginning of something better. An America where people are valued for their character and contributions rather than the accident of their ancestry." The territorial legislature ultimately voted down the Racial Purity Act by a narrow margin, influenced partly by Rebecca's testimony, but more significantly by the broader coalition of families, communities, and political leaders who had mobilized. In opposition, the legal precedent established by her case would protect other mixed families for generations to come. As Rebecca and her family returned to their canyon after the hearings, they found a community that had been transformed by the experience of defending their values in public. The attention had brought new visitors, new opportunities, and new challenges, but it had also confirmed that their model of cross-cultural cooperation was not just personally fulfilling, but politically viable. The 100 horses had multiplied. But more importantly, so had the possibilities for love to triumph over fear, understanding to overcome prejudice, and families to form according to the heart's wisdom rather than society's restrictions. The victory in the territorial hearings had unexpected consequences that rippled far beyond the legal precedent it established. Word of Rebecca's testimony spread through networks of reformers, activists, and progressive thinkers across the nation, making her an unlikely symbol of American possibility at a time when the country was grappling with questions about inclusion, citizenship, and national identity. Letters arrived daily at the trading post from people seeking advice, inspiration, or simply wanting to share their own stories of love across cultural boundaries. A Methodist minister from Ohio wrote about his congregation's struggle to accept his marriage to a woman of German immigrant background. A freed slave from Georgia sought guidance about his relationship with a Cherokee woman. A wealthy widow from Boston asked about establishing a school that would welcome children of all backgrounds. Rebecca found herself reluctantly thrust into the role of advisor and symbol for causes she had never consciously chosen to champion. The simple act of following her heart had somehow become a political statement about the future of American society. But the attention brought dangers as well as opportunities. White supremacist groups began targeting the canyon with harassment, campaigns designed to force the family to abandon their home. Threatening letters arrived weekly, some signed with crude drawings of nooses or burning crosses. Cattle were poisoned, water sources were contaminated, and night riders fired shots into the air near the Hogans to terrorize the residents. The harassment culminated one September evening when armed men surrounded the trading post just as families were gathering for a harvest celebration. 20 masked riders, their faces hidden and their intentions clearly hostile, demanded that Rebecca and her half-breed spawn leave the territory within 48 hours. Ayanna emerged from the trading post with his rifle, flanked by his uncle Hastin and several other Navajo men who had fought Apache raiders in their youth. The two groups faced each other in the flickering light of torches, tension crackling like electricity before a storm. "You have no authority here," Ayanna said calmly, though his weapon remained ready. "This is tribal land, and you are trespassing." The leader of the riders, a man whose voice suggested education despite his crude message, laughed harshly. "Tribal land? That's a legal fiction that exists only as long as the federal government allows it. Things are changing, Indian. The new state won't be as tolerant of your kind of arrangements." Rebecca stepped out of the trading post, ignoring Ayanna's gesture for her to remain inside. She had learned over the years that confrontation often diminished when the supposed victim refused to act afraid. "What exactly do you hope to accomplish here?" she asked the masked leader. "You want to terrorize a community that has harmed no one and contributed to the prosperity of this entire region." "We want to preserve the integrity of the white race," the man replied. "Your abomination of a family is a disease that spreads to other weak-minded women who forget their duties to their own people." Before Rebecca could respond, an unexpected voice cut through the tension. "Stand down, all of you." Sheriff William Tucker rode into the circle of light, accompanied by 6 deputies and looking considerably older than when he had last visited the canyon. He had been elected to territorial office and carried authority that even night riders had to respect. "I know who you are, Henderson," Tucker said, addressing the masked leader directly. And I know the rest of you too. Masks don't hide stupidity or cowardice. The man called Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Sheriff, we're acting to protect our community from foreign influences that threaten our way of life. Your way of life seems to involve terrorizing families and threatening children, Tucker replied coldly. That's not protection. That's criminal behavior that I'm sworn to prevent. The confrontation might have escalated into violence, but Dr. Harrison's arrival with a dozen armed men from nearby white settlements tipped the balance decisively. These were ranchers, merchants, and townspeople who had done business with Rebecca's trading post and benefited from the medical services she provided. This community has saved more lives and created more prosperity than anywhere else in the territory, Dr. Harrison declared. Anyone who wants to destroy it will have to go through all of us. Faced with organized opposition from both native and white residents, the Night Riders retreated with threats of future action. But their departure marked a turning point in how the broader community viewed Rebecca's family and the principles they represented. The next morning brought a surprise that would reshape everything once again. A telegram arrived from Washington, D.C., bearing the seal of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and signed by the commissioner himself. President Theodore Roosevelt had personally requested a meeting with Rebecca to discuss her experiences as part of his administration's review of federal Indian policy. The invitation created intense debate within the family and clan. Federal attention had historically brought disaster for Native communities, and many argued that engaging with Washington politicians would only invite greater interference in their affairs. But Shimasani, now approaching 90 but still mentally sharp, offered wisdom that carried the weight of decades. The white world will make decisions about us whether we participate or not, she said during a family council. Better to speak for ourselves than to let others speak for us. The journey to Washington, D.C. in the autumn of 1901 was Rebecca's first return to the world of her birth since arriving in the canyon 15 years earlier. Traveling with Ayana and their children, she witnessed the rapid changes that were transforming America at the dawn of the new century. Cities had grown enormous, filled with immigrants from every corner of the world. Industry had created wealth, beyond anything she remembered from her childhood, but also poverty and social problems that seemed almost incomprehensible. The confident optimism of American expansion was everywhere evident, but so were the tensions and conflicts that arose. When different peoples competed for resources and recognition, Washington itself overwhelmed her with its scale and grandeur. The Capitol building, the White House, the monuments to American achievement, all spoke of power and ambition that dwarfed anything she had experienced in the Southwest. Yet she also sensed a hunger for authenticity, for stories that proved American ideals could actually work in practice. President Roosevelt received them in the Oval Office on a crisp October morning. The man, famous for his energy and enthusiasm, immediately put them at ease with his genuine curiosity about their experiences and his obvious respect for their achievements. "Mrs. Rebecca," he said, using the title that acknowledged both her Anglo heritage and her tribal status, "your story has reached my desk through several channels. My advisors tell me you've created something unique out there, a community that proves different peoples can cooperate successfully without losing their distinct identities." Rebecca studied the president carefully, trying to gauge whether his interest was genuine or merely political. "Mr. President, we've simply tried to live according to principles that honor human dignity regardless of ancestry. We've found that when people are valued for their contributions rather than their appearance, remarkable things become possible." Roosevelt leaned forward, his famous energy focused entirely on their conversation. "That's exactly what I want to discuss. This country is changing rapidly. We're receiving millions of immigrants who bring different languages, religions, and customs. Some people say this diversity will destroy us. Others say it will make us stronger. I want to hear from someone who has lived this question rather than just debated it. Over the next several hours, Rebecca shared the practical details of building a multicultural community. She described the challenges of bridging different languages and customs, the economic benefits of combining diverse skills and perspectives, and the social structures that had evolved to manage conflicts and maintain harmony. Ayana spoke about the Navajo perspective on these issues, explaining how tribal traditions had always incorporated new people and ideas while maintaining core values and identity. Their children demonstrated their linguistic abilities and cultural knowledge, impressing the president with their articulate descriptions of life between worlds. "What you've created," Roosevelt finally said, "is a working model of what America could become. Not a melting pot that destroys differences, but a symphony that harmonizes them." The president's support led to invitations from universities, reform organizations, and religious groups across the country. Rebecca found herself reluctantly becoming a public speaker, sharing her experiences with audiences who ranged from sympathetic to hostile, but were always intensely curious. At Harvard University, she addressed professors and students about the educational benefits of cultural diversity. At the Chicago World's Fair, she demonstrated traditional Navajo healing techniques alongside modern medical procedures. At churches throughout the Northeast, she spoke about finding God's love in unexpected places and among supposedly uncivilized peoples. But the most meaningful engagement came when she was invited to address the National Association of Colored Women, an organization of African American activists working for civil rights and social reform. These women understood the challenges of fighting prejudice while building positive alternatives to discrimination. "Sister Rebecca," said Mary Church, Durrell, the association's president, "your path has been different from ours, but your courage speaks to the same truths we champion. Love is stronger than hatred. Character matters more than color. Family can be chosen as well as inherited." The months of travel and speaking engagements had transformed Rebecca's understanding of her own story and its significance. What she had experienced as a personal journey toward authenticity, others saw as a blueprint for American renewal. The love that had begun between two individuals had become a symbol of possibility for an entire nation struggling with questions of identity and inclusion. But success on the national stage came with a price that became clear only when they finally returned home to the canyon. The community had grown during their absence, attracting settlers drawn by stories of successful cultural cooperation. What had once been an intimate extended family had become a small town with all the complications that growth inevitably brought. New arrivals included sincere families seeking the tolerance and opportunity they had heard about, but also opportunists looking to profit from the community's reputation and idealistic reformers who wanted to reshape the settlement according to their own theories about social improvement. Most challenging were the federal bureaucrats who had arrived to study the community's integration methods for possible application elsewhere. These well-meaning officials wanted to document, systematize, and replicate what Rebecca's family had built organically over many years. "They want to turn our life into a government program," Ayana observed, as they watched surveyors mapping the canyon for a proposed model integration community that would be administered by federal agencies. Rebecca felt the weight of unintended consequences pressing down on her. The attention she had hoped would protect other mixed families was threatening to destroy the very qualities that made their community special: its organic development, its respect for individual choice, its freedom from external control. Standing in the doorway of the Hogan, where she had first found refuge 16 years earlier, Rebecca realized that their greatest challenge was not overcoming prejudice or proving their worth to skeptics. It was preserving the authentic spirit of their community while navigating the fame and scrutiny that success had brought. The 100 horses had multiplied into thousands. The simple love story had become a national symbol, and the quiet canyon had become a destination for pilgrims seeking proof that different worlds could merge successfully. But in gaining everything they had worked toward, Rebecca and Ayanna faced the risk of losing everything that had made their journey meaningful. The question now was whether love that had proven strong enough to overcome external opposition could also survive the more subtle threats that came with acceptance, success, and the pressure to become an example for others rather than simply being themselves. 25 years had passed since Rebecca first walked into the desert as a banished woman with nothing but love to guide her. Now, in 1912, as New Mexico prepared for statehood, she stood on the rim of the canyon, watching her grandson play with horses that descended from the original 100 Ayanna had owned when they married. Time had silvered her hair and lined her face, but her eyes held the same determined fire that had carried her through every challenge. Beside her, Ayanna moved with the careful grace of a man in his 60s, his own hair white, but his spirit undiminished by the years of building something unprecedented in the American West. Their children, Adzan and Hastin, now 28, had become leaders in their own right. Adzan served as the territory's first female Indian agent, working to protect tribal rights while facilitating cooperation between different communities. Hastin had established a network of trading posts that stretched from Colorado to Arizona, creating economic opportunities for hundreds of families regardless of their cultural background. But perhaps their greatest achievement was the quiet revolution they had sparked simply by living authentically. Across the Southwest, other mixed families had followed their example, creating communities where love mattered more than ancestry and character counted more than color. The model they had pioneered was spreading organically, not through government programs, but through the simple human desire for acceptance and belonging. The federal bureaucrats had eventually departed when they realized that the community's success couldn't be bottled into regulations and replicated elsewhere. What made Rebecca's Canyon special wasn't any particular system or structure, but the daily choice of hundreds of individuals to treat each other with dignity and respect. Dr. Harrison, now retired but still a frequent visitor, arrived that morning with news that brought both satisfaction and melancholy. Cedar Ridge, the town that had banished Rebecca decades earlier, was struggling to survive as younger residents moved away and businesses failed. The narrow-mindedness that had once seemed like strength had become a weakness in a region where cooperation and adaptability determined prosperity. "They ask about you sometimes," Dr. Harrison told Rebecca as they sat in the expanded clinic that now trained medical students from universities across the country. The older residents remember the teacher who tried to open their minds before. They drove her away. Rebecca felt no satisfaction in her former community's decline. "Hatred always consumes the hater more than the hated," she reflected. "I pray they find wisdom before it's too late." That evening, the extended family gathered for their weekly council meeting, a tradition that had evolved to help manage the complex decisions facing their growing community. 3 generations sat around the fire, their faces representing the beautiful diversity that had emerged from Rebecca and Ayanna's initial courage to love across boundaries. Shimasani, now 96 and the community's most revered elder, spoke with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed more change than anyone thought possible. "When Rebecca first came to us, some doubted whether a white woman could truly become Navajo. Tonight, her great-grandchildren speak our language, follow our customs, and carry our values into the future. Love has proven stronger than blood." Chachiyund. Voices around the fire shared stories and dreams that would have been impossible in the world Rebecca had fled. A 15-year-old girl of Navajo and Mexican heritage spoke of her plans to study law and defend indigenous rights. A boy whose ancestry included Anglo, Apache, and African blood described his invention of new farming techniques that increased crop yields in desert conditions. As the fire burned low and the family dispersed to their homes, Rebecca walked alone to the stream where she had first spoken with Shimasani a quarter-century earlier. The water still flowed clear and cold from the canyon walls, unchanged despite all the human drama that had unfolded around it. Ayana found her there, as he had. So many times over the years when she needed to think through difficult decisions or simply remember how far they had traveled together. Their love had deepened through decades of shared challenges, growing from passionate attraction into something more profound and enduring. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had never met?" Rebecca asked, taking his weathered hand in hers. Ayana smiled, the expression crinkling the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent outdoors under the desert sun. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Love that's strong creates its own destiny." They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the canyon and thinking about the legacy they had built, not through grand gestures, but through daily choices to honor love over fear, inclusion over exclusion, growth over stagnation. The 100 horses had multiplied into vast herds that grazed across multiple states. The simple trading post had become a network of businesses that employed thousands. The forbidden romance had evolved into a multi-generational family that embodied America's highest ideals while honoring the ancient wisdom of indigenous peoples. But perhaps most importantly, their love story had proven that individuals could indeed change the world by having the courage to live according to their deepest values, regardless of external pressure to conform. As they walked back toward their hogan, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her from a one-room schoolhouse in Cedar Ridge to this moment of deep contentment in the canyon she now called home. She had been banished for love, but that banishment had led to a homecoming more profound than anything she could have imagined. The woman who had once taught children to read and write had become a teacher of something far more important. The lesson that love recognizes no boundaries, that family extends beyond blood, and that home exists wherever the heart finds peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as statehood changed the legal landscape, and new generations faced pressures their parents had never imagined. But tonight, surrounded by the family she had chosen and built, Rebecca knew that love had indeed proven stronger than hatred, that acceptance had triumphed over prejudice, and that the courage to follow one's heart could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles, but somehow blessing the quiet revolution that had begun with one woman's refusal to let others define the boundaries of her love. In the end, Rebecca had not just found happiness, she had helped create a new vision of what America could become when it lived up to its highest ideals. The 100 horses had been beautiful, but they were merely symbols of something far more valuable, a life lived with complete authenticity, a love that had conquered every obstacle, and a community built on the radical idea that people should be valued for their character rather than their ancestry. As Rebecca and Ayana reached their home, they paused to look back at the canyon that had sheltered their love and witnessed their transformation. Tomorrow, their great-grandchildren would carry their values into a future none of them could fully imagine. But tonight, they rested in the satisfaction of knowing they had used their time on Earth to make the world a little more loving, a little more accepting, and a little more hopeful. The story that had begun with banishment had become a testament to the transformative power of love that refuses to accept limitations, builds bridges across any divide, and creates new possibilities. For human connection in every generation, the 100 Horses had been just the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.